January the 26th. I was yesterday in the second part of Travels with my aunt in chapter 1, and I stopped because I was interrupted. This is a story about Henry Pulling, a retired bank manager, who meets his Aunt Augusta after 50 years at his mother's funeral. They went on a trip together to Istanbul and to Boulogne to find Henry's father's grave. He went back to England, but his Aunt Augusta didn't follow. And then he received a letter from her that he should make his way to Argentina. And he went to Argentina, but his aunt was already gone. He is now on his way to Paraguay. I propped the photograph of Freetown Harbour in its expensive frame at the back of my dressing table and supported it with hooks on either side. I had brought with me, among more ephemeral literature, Paul Graves' Golden Treasure, the collected poems of Tennyson and Browning, and at the last minute I had added Rob Roy, perhaps because it contained the only photograph I possessed of my aunt. When I opened the book now, the pages naturally divided at the photograph, and I found myself thinking, not for the first time, that the happy smile, the young breasts, the curve of her body in the old-fashioned bathing costume were like the suggestion of a budding maternity. The memory of Visconti's son, as he took her in his arms on Milan platform, hurt me a little, and I looked out of my porthole to escape my thoughts into the winter day and saw a tall, lean, sad grey man gazing back at me. My window gave on to the bows, and he turned quickly away to watch the ship's wake, embarrassed at having been noticed. I finished my unpacking and went down to the bar. There was the restlessness of departure about the ship. Lunch, as I learned, was to be served at the curious hour of 11:30. But until that time the passengers could no more settle than can the passengers on a channel crossing. They came up and down the stairs, they looked at the bar and inspected the bottles and went away again without ordering a drink. They streamed into the dining room and out again. They sat down for a moment at a table in the lounge, then rose to look through a porthole at the momentous river scene, which was to be with us for the next 4 days. I was the only one to take a drink. There was no sherry, so I took a gin and tonic. But the gin was Argentinian, though the name was English, and had a foreign flavour. The low wooded shore of what I took to be Uruguay unrolled in a misty rain which now began to clear the decks. The water of the river was the colour of coffee with too much milk. An old man, who must have been well into his 80s, reached a decision and sat down beside me. He asked me a question in Spanish, which I couldn't answer. "No hablo en español, señor," I said. But this scrap of Spanish, which I had learned from a phrase book, he took as an encouragement, and at once began to deliver a small lecture, removing from his pocket a large magnifying glass and laying it down between us. I tried to escape by paying my bill, but he grabbed it from my hands and stuck it under his own glass, at the same time ordering the barman to refill mine. I've never been in the habit of taking 2 drinks before lunch, and I definitely did not like the taste of gin, but for the lack of Spanish I had to submit. He was making some demand on me, but I could not guess what. The words of "el favor" were repeated several times, and when he saw I didn't understand, he held out his own hand as a demonstration and began to examine it through the magnifying glass. A voice said, "Can I be of any help?" And turning, I saw the sad, lean man who had watched me through my porthole. I said, "I don't understand what this gentleman wants." "His hobby is reading hands. He says he's never had the opportunity to read an American's. Tell him I'm English. He says the same applies. I don't think he sees much difference. We are both Anglo-Saxon. There was nothing I could do but hold out my hand. The old man examined it with extreme care through the magnifying glass. He asked me to translate, but maybe you'd rather I didn't. It's kind of personal, a fortune. I don't mind, I said, and I thought of Hattie and her tea leaves and how she had foreseen my troubles in her best l'absence souillon. He said, you have come from a long way off. That's a bit obvious, isn't it? But your troubles are nearly over. That can hardly be true. I have to go back home. He sees a reunion of someone very close to you. Your wife, perhaps? I have no wife. He says it could be your mother. She's dead, at least. You have had a great deal of money in your care, but no longer. At any rate, he scored there. I was in a bank. He sees a death, but it's far away from your heart line and your lifeline. It's not an important death, perhaps a stranger's. Do you believe in this nonsense? I asked the American. No, I guess not, but I try to keep an open mind. My name's O'Toole, James O'Toole. Mine's Pulling, Henry, I said. In the background, the old man continued his report in Spanish. He seemed not to care whether it was translated or not. He pulled out a notebook and was writing things down. You're a Londoner? Yes. I come from Philadelphia. He wants me to tell you that yours is the 972nd hand he studied. Sorry, 975th. The old man closed his notebook with an air of satisfaction. Then he shook hands with me and thanked me, paid for the drinks, bowed and departed. The magnifying glass bulged in his pocket like a gun. Mind if I join you? The American asked. He wore an English tweed coat and a pair of old grey flannel trousers. Thin and melancholy, he looked as English as I did. There were small lines bitten by care around the eyes and mouth, and like a man who has lost his way, he had a habit of looking this way and that with anxiety. He had nothing in common with the Americans whom I had met in England, noisy and self-confident, with the young unlined faces of children, romping and shouting to one another across the nursery floor. He said, "You're going to Asunción too?" Yes. There's nowhere else on this trip worth a visit. Corrientes isn't too bad if you don't spend a night. Formosa, that's a dump. Only smugglers get off there, though they do talk of the fishing. I guess you're not a smuggler? No. You seem to know these parts well. Too well, he said. You're on vacation? I suppose so, yes. Going to see the Iguazi Falls? Lots of people go there. If you do, better stay on the Brazilian side. Only good hotels. Are they worth a visit? Maybe, if you like that kind of thing. Just a lot of water, if you ask me. The barman obviously knew the American well, for he had made him a dry martini without a word said, and he drank it now morosely and without pleasure. It's not like Gordon's, he said. He took a slow look at me, almost as if he were memorizing my features. I took you for a businessman, Henry, he said. Vacationing all by yourself, not much fun. Strange country. And you don't speak the language. Not that Spanish is any good outside the city. In the country, they all speak Guarani. Do you? A smattering. I noticed he asked questions more than he answered them, and when he gave me information, it was the kind of information which I could have obtained from any guidebook. Picturesque ruins, he said. Old Jesuit settlements. They appeal to you, Henry? I felt he wouldn't be satisfied until I had told him more. Until I had told him more. What was the harm? I wasn't carrying a gold brick or suitcase stuffed with notes. As he said, I was no smuggler. I'm visiting an old relation of mine, I said, and added, James. I could see he wanted that too. My friends call me Thule, he said automatically, and it was quite a while before in my mind the coin fell. Are you in business here? Not exactly, he said. I do research work, social research. You know, the sort of thing, Henry. Cost of living, malnutrition, degree of illiteracy. Have a drink. 2 is all I can take, Thule, I said, and it was only at the repetition of the name that I remembered. Thule. He pushed his own glass forward for another. Do you find things easy in Paraguay? I've read in papers you Americans have a lot of trouble in South America. Not in Paraguay, he said. We and the General are like that. He raised his thumb and forefinger and transferred them to his refilled glass. He's quite a tough dictator, so they tell me. It's what the country needs, Henry. A strong hand. Don't mistake me, though. I keep out of politics. Simple research. That's my line. Have you published anything? Oh, he replied vaguely. Reports, technical. They wouldn't interest you, Henry. It was inevitable that when the bell rang, we should go into lunch together. We shared the table with 2 other men. One was a grey-faced man in a blue city suit who was on a diet. The steward, who knew him well, brought him a special dish of boiled vegetables, which he looked at carefully before eating, twitching the end of his nose and his upper lip like a rabbit. The other was a fat old priest with rogue eyes who looked rather like Winston Churchill. I was amused to watch O'Toole set about the 2 of them. Before we had finished our bad liver pate, he had found that the priest had a parish in a village near Corrientes, on the Argentinian side of the border, and before we had eaten our equally bad pasta, he broke a little way into the taciturnity of the man with a nose like a rabbit's. He was apparently a businessman returning to Formosa. When he mentioned Formosa, O'Toole looked at me and gave a little nod of confirmation he had placed him. Now, I guess you are to be a pharmacist, he said, leading him on. The man had little English, but he understood that. He looked at O'Toole and twitched his nose. I thought he was not going to reply, but out the phrase came with all its international ambiguity, import-export. The priest for some reason began to speak of flying saucers. They swarmed over Argentina, so it seemed. Perhaps if we had clear nights we would observe one from the boat. You really believe in them? I asked, and the old priest in his excitement abandoned his little English altogether. He says, O'Toole explained, that you must have seen yesterday's Nación. 12 cars were stopped coming from Mar del Plata to Buenos Aires on Monday night. When a flying saucer passes overhead, a car engine stops. The Reverend Father believes they have a divine origin. He translated almost as rapidly as the other talked. Recently, a couple who were driving to Mar del Plata for the weekend were surrounded by a cloud. The car stopped, and when the cloud dispersed, they found they were in Mexico, near Acapulco. And he believed even that? Sure, they all do. Once a week on the radio at Buenos Aires, you can hear a program all about flying saucers, who's seen them that week and where. Our friend says it may be the explanation of the flying house in Loreto. It was just picked up in Palestine, like those people on the road to Mar del Plata, and dumped down in Italy. They served us a tough steak and afterwards oranges. The priest lapsed into silence and ate with a slight frown. Perhaps he felt in the presence of unbelievers. The businessman pushed back his plate of boiled vegetables and excused himself. I asked my neighbour what I had been longing to ask all through the meal. "Are you married, Tuli?" "Yeah, sort of." "You've got a daughter?" "Sure, why?" "She's studying in London." "She's in Kathmandu," I said. "Kathmandu? Why, that's Nepal." The lines of anxiety deepened. "That's a hell of a thing to tell me," he said. "How do you know?" I told him about the Orient Express, but I left out any reference to the young man. I said she was with a group of students, which was true when I last saw her. He said, "What can I do, Henry? I've got my work. I can't go chasing round the world. Lucinda doesn't know the worry she gives." "Lucinda?" "Her mother chose the name," he said with bitterness. "She calls herself Tuli now, like you." "She does? That's new." "She seemed to have a great admiration for you." "I let her go to England," he said. "I thought she'd be safe there. But Kathmandu." He pushed away the orange, which he had so carefully sliced. "Where's she living? I doubt if there's any good hotel in the place. If there's a Hilton, at least you know where you are. What shall I do, Henry?" "She'll be all right," I said, without conviction. "I could send a cable to the embassy. I suppose there's an embassy?" He got up abruptly and said, "I've got to take a leak." I followed him out of the dining room and down a corridor to the lavatory. There we stood side by side in silence. I noticed his lips moving. Perhaps I thought he was having an imaginary dialogue with his daughter. We left the lavatory together, and without a word he sat down on a bench on the port side of the deck. It was no longer raining, but it was grey and cold. There was nothing to see but some small trees growing at the edge of the dirty river, an occasional hut, and through the trees an expanse of brown scrub, stretching to the horizon without a hill in sight. "Argentina?" I asked to break the silence. "It's all Argentina," he said, "till we reached the Paraguay River, our last day." He took out a pocketbook and made some notes. They seemed to be figures. When he had finished, he said, "Excuse me, it's a record I keep, kind of a study I'm making. Your daughter told me you were in the CIA." He turned on me, his sad eyes. "She's a romantic," he said. "She imagines things." "Is the CIA romantic?" "A kid thinks so, I guess. She saw some reports of mine marked secret, anything secret that goes to a government department, even malnutrition in Asunción." I wasn't sure which of them I believed. He asked me with an air of helplessness, "What would you do, Henry?" I said, "If you were really in the CIA, you could probably find out how she was from one of your men there. You must have a man in Kathmandu." "If I were really in the CIA," he said, "I wouldn't want to get them mixed up in my private affairs. Have you any children, Henry?" "No." "You're a lucky man. People talk about the age of reason. There's no such thing. When you have a child, you are condemned to be a father for life. They go away from you. You can't go away from them." "How would I know?" He brooded a while, staring out over the scrub, which never changed. The boat moved slowly against the strong flow to the sea. He said, "My dad was all against the divorce, for the sake of the child, but there are limits to what a man can take. She began to bring her boyfriends home. She was corrupting Lucinda." "She didn't succeed," I said. So that was the end of chapter 1 of the second part, and I read chapter 2 soon.